There's a building on Sunset Boulevard that has seen more romance, more betrayal, and more raw power than most European palaces. The Beverly Hills Hotel sits at the corner of Sunset Boulevard and Rodeo Drive, wrapped in its signature salmon-pink stucco and surrounded by 12 acres of lush tropical gardens. When it first opened its doors in 1912, Beverly Hills didn't even exist. There were no movie studios, no stars, no Hollywood machine. There was only dust, abandoned bean fields, and one man's impossible dream. That hotel would go on to become the throne room of American celebrity, a place where empires were built over breakfast and destroyed before sunset. Presidents and gangsters passed through its doors. Legends and frauds shared its halls. Artists who reshaped culture and criminals who nearly tore it apart all crossed paths there. For more than a century, fortunes have been made and lost behind those pink walls. Secret affairs bloomed in its private bungalows. The Academy Awards were conceived in its ballrooms. And through wars, scandals, boycotts, and even threats of demolition, the building endured. This is the story of the Beverly Hills Hotel, Hollywood's Pink Palace. In 1906, the land that would one day become Beverly Hills was nothing but open ground. Dirt roads cut through deserted bean fields once worked by Mexican laborers who harvested crops for sprawling ranches across the coastal plain. A few pepper trees offered shade to roadrunners and ground squirrels. Los Angeles itself ended miles to the east. The film industry didn't yet exist. Hollywood was a quiet temperance community filled with modest homes and church socials. But one man looked at that emptiness and saw something else. Burton Green was a Michigan-born oil man who arrived in Southern California in 1900 searching for petroleum beneath the dusty hills. He found none. Instead, he discovered land for 1,000 acres of it, purchased as Rancho Rodeo de Los Aguas. When drilling produced nothing but dust, most of his investors wanted to walk away. Green proposed a different plan. Rather than abandon the land, they would subdivide it and create a new kind of community, one designed not for farmers, but for wealthy Easterners seeking sunshine, prestige, and social standing. In 1906, Green hired landscape architect Wilbur David Cook to design the streets. Instead of the rigid grid common throughout Los Angeles, Cook followed the land's natural contours. His winding boulevards created an air of old-world elegance, making the neighborhood feel as though it had existed for generations. They named the development Beverly Hills, after Beverly Farms in Massachusetts, where affluent Boston families spent their summers. Still, Green knew that no one would buy homes in a community that existed only on paper. He needed an anchor, something tangible to make the dream real. He needed a hotel. Green approached Margaret Anderson, a savvy Los Angeles businesswoman who had built her fortune managing apartment buildings downtown. Anderson immediately saw the opportunity. She agreed to build and operate a luxury hotel on a 12-acre parcel at the corner of Sunset Boulevard and what would later become Rodeo Drive. The location was no accident. As automobiles became more common, Sunset Boulevard would become the primary route heading west. Anderson hired Los Angeles architect Elmer Gray to design the building. Gray had trained in the Beaux-Arts tradition, but understood that Southern California required a different visual language. He proposed a mission revival design, a romanticized version of California's Spanish colonial past. It suggested history, permanence, and a deep connection to land, exactly the illusion Green needed to sell to wealthy newcomers. Construction began in 1911. The hotel would feature 325 rooms arranged around interior courtyards in the style of a Spanish manor. The main building stretched along Sunset Boulevard, rising 3 stories high, built from reinforced concrete and coated in salmon-pink stucco. Gray chose the color intentionally. Pink photographed beautifully. It popped against the brown hills and blue sky. It was unforgettable. The grounds were just as important as the structure itself. Anderson brought in landscaping crews to transform all 12 acres into a tropical paradise, plants that had no natural reason to survive in a semi-arid climate. Date palms were imported from Egypt. Banana trees came from Central America. Birds of paradise arrived from South Africa. The result was a carefully maintained fantasy of eternal spring, sustained by constant irrigation from deep wells drilled into the aquifer. The total cost of the project approached $500,000, roughly $15 million in today's money. In 1912, that was an extraordinary investment for a hotel sitting in the middle of nowhere. Anderson was betting everything on the idea that nowhere would soon become somewhere. The Beverly Hills Hotel officially opened on May 12, 1912. 7 months later, the surrounding community would incorporate as its own city. But on opening day, Beverly Hills was still little more than a real estate gamble. Only a handful of homes had been completed. Most lots stood empty. Guests arrived by automobile or took the Pacific Electric Railway's red cars to Santa Monica Boulevard, then hired carriages to travel the remaining distance along dirt roads. The opening ceremony drew Los Angeles high society, which at the time meant ranchers who had struck oil, merchants benefiting from the city's rapid growth, and a small number of wealthy Midwesterners who had relocated for health reasons. The Los Angeles Times praised the hotel as a triumph of California architecture. What no one could foresee was that within just 3 years, an entirely new industry would rise only miles away. In 1915, D.W. Griffith released The Birth of a Nation, a technically groundbreaking and morally reprehensible film that revealed cinema's immense power to influence mass audiences. Until then, the movie industry had been centered in New York and New Jersey. But filmmakers began moving west, drawn by Southern California's year-round sunshine, varied landscapes, and inexpensive land for studio construction. Within 2 years, Hollywood and its surrounding communities became the center of American filmmaking. The Beverly Hills Hotel was perfectly positioned for this transformation. It offered luxury. It offered privacy. It was close to the studios rising in Hollywood, Culver City, and Burbank. But more than anything else, it offered something essential to people whose faces sold tickets: discretion. Margaret Anderson understood exactly who her guests were. She instructed her staff never to acknowledge celebrities by name in public areas. Autograph seekers were not allowed on the property. Photographers were banned from dining rooms. What happened inside the Beverly Hills Hotel stayed inside the Beverly Hills Hotel. That unspoken code of silence became the foundation of its legend, and the reason the Pink Palace would reign over Hollywood for generations. The first true movie star to discover property was Douglas Fairbanks, the athletic leading man who would become one of the biggest names of the silent film era. Fairbanks checked in shortly after the hotel opened and immediately understood what Margaret Anderson had created. This was not just a hotel. It was a refuge. In 1919, Fairbanks married Mary Pickford, America's sweetheart, in a ceremony that made them the most famous couple in the country. They chose the Beverly Hills Hotel for their honeymoon. Their stay provided the hotel with a level of celebrity endorsement that no advertising budget could ever buy. Within a year of that honeymoon, the hotel's guest registry read like a catalog of American fame. Charlie Chaplin took a suite on the second floor. Gloria Swanson presided over the dining room like royalty. Rudolph Valentino, the brooding heartthrob whose death in 1926 would spark mass hysteria, maintained a permanent residence. Will Rogers, the cowboy philosopher whose plain-spoken humor made him the highest-paid entertainer in America, lived at the hotel for months at a time. The hotel's architecture was perfectly designed to provide the privacy these performers demanded. The main building offered traditional hotel rooms, but the true prize lay in the collection of bungalows scattered throughout the 12 acres of gardens. These detached structures, some with as many as 6 rooms, were completely separate from the main property. A star could entertain guests, conduct business, or carry on a discreet affair without ever stepping into a public space. Each bungalow had its own entrance, its own telephone line, and enough distance from neighboring units that any sounds were easily swallowed by the surrounding tropical foliage. Margaret Anderson retired in 1928, selling her stake in the hotel to a group of investors. The property continued to flourish. By the late 1920s, the Beverly Hills Hotel had firmly established itself as the unofficial headquarters of the movie industry. Stars lived there. Directors held meetings in the lobby. Producers negotiated deals over lunch. Then, in October 1929, the stock market crashed. The Great Depression that followed devastated the American economy. Hollywood, however, proved unexpectedly resilient. People still needed entertainment. Movie attendance remained strong throughout the 1930s, and the Beverly Hills Hotel benefited from the industry's survival. While luxury hotels across the country shut their doors, the Pink Palace on Sunset Boulevard remained open. In 1941, the hotel changed hands once again. A group of investors led by Hernando Cortright and Ben Silverstein purchased the property for $1.5 million, roughly $31 million in today's currency. Cortright, who had previously managed the El Mirador Hotel in Palm Springs, understood the unusual needs of celebrity clientele. Under his leadership, the Beverly Hills Hotel would reach its absolute peak. Cortright's first major innovation was the Polo Lounge. Before 1941, the hotel's main dining room operated in a formal European style. Cortright recognized that Hollywood power brokers preferred a more relaxed environment for conducting business. He transformed a small bar off the main lobby into an intimate space decorated with English writing and writing memorabilia. The name itself was pure marketing. There was no polo field nearby, but the sport evoked wealth, status, and refinement. The Polo Lounge opened in 1941 and almost immediately became the most important room in Hollywood. Studio executives held breakfast meetings there to discuss casting decisions and budgets. Agents negotiated contracts over lunch. Screenwriters pitched story ideas to producers over cocktails. The round leather booths offered just enough privacy for confidential discussions, while still keeping conversations visible enough to signal influence. To be seen in the Polo Lounge was to matter. The room developed its own unwritten rules. Booth 1, closest to the entrance, was reserved for the most powerful figures in the industry. Louis B. Mayer, the ruthless head of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, claimed it as his personal territory. When he arrived for his regular breakfast, staff seated him there automatically without question. The hotel's telephone system became legendary. In the era before mobile phones, the Polo Lounge maintained a network of telephones that could be brought directly to the tables on long cords. A businessman could take calls without ever leaving his booth. Witnesses recalled powerful men juggling multiple handsets at once, negotiating 3 different contracts while their eggs slowly grew cold. Darryl Zanuck, the head of 20th Century Fox, conducted so much business at the hotel that he had a direct phone line installed between his office and his regular booth. When Zanuck was in the Polo Lounge, which was nearly every day, his staff knew exactly where to reach him. Even the menu became part of Hollywood legend. The McCarthy salad, created by the Polo Lounge chef in the 1960s, featured chopped greens, turkey, cheese, and avocado mixed tableside. It became the signature dish of executives who wanted something filling enough to sustain hours of meetings, but light enough to avoid afternoon sluggishness. The salad remains on the menu today, virtually unchanged. Beyond the Polo Lounge, the hotel continued to function as a long-term residence for Hollywood's elite. Howard Hughes, the eccentric billionaire who would eventually descend into paranoia, maintained multiple bungalows at the same time during the 1940s. He used them both as offices for his various business ventures and as private hideaways for actresses he was pursuing. Hughes remained a fixture at the hotel for years, his increasingly strange behavior tolerated as long as his money cleared. Elizabeth Taylor lived at the Beverly Hills Hotel during several chapters of her turbulent life. She stayed in Bungalow 5 so often that the staff eventually referred to it as the Elizabeth Taylor Bungalow. She recovered there between marriages. She entertained lovers there between divorces. The hotel also attracted guests from far beyond the entertainment world. Presidents stayed on the property. Foreign dignitaries maintained suites during their visits to California. Business tycoons from the East Coast discovered that a week at the Beverly Hills Hotel opened doors that remained firmly closed to them in New York or Chicago. The property had become more than a hotel. It was a symbol of arrival, but the glamour came with a darker side. The same privacy that protected stars also concealed illicit activity. Affairs flourished in the bungalows. Illegal gambling operations ran out of certain suites, with the quiet cooperation of staff. Drug use, rarely acknowledged publicly, was an open secret among longtime employees. The hotel's strict code of silence shielded everyone equally. A star caught with someone else's spouse could trust that the night manager would never alert the gossip columnists. A producer engaged in negotiations that violated antitrust laws knew the hotel phones were not tapped. The Beverly Hills Hotel had effectively become a Vatican of the entertainment industry, a sovereign territory where normal rules did not apply. The hotel reached its cultural peak in the 1950s and early 1960s. This was the height of the studio system, when a handful of executives could end or launch careers with a single phone call. When being seen in the right place at the right time could change everything. And the right place was almost always the Beverly Hills Hotel. Marilyn Monroe maintained a standing reservation during her years in Hollywood. She would retreat into the bungalow for days at a time, emerging only for film shoots or carefully orchestrated public appearances. The staff learned to anticipate her needs without being asked. Fresh flowers delivered daily. Champagne chilled to precisely the right temperature. Enough privacy to hide from a world that would eventually consume her. Frank Sinatra treated the Beverly Hills Hotel as a second home during his Hollywood years. He held court in the Polo Lounge, surrounded by a rotating cast of celebrities and hangers-on collectively known as the Rat Pack. Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop joined him for marathon drinking sessions that often began at lunch and stretched well into the early morning hours. Management tolerated behavior that would have resulted in immediate eviction for lesser guests. Sinatra's fame and money bought him immunity. The hotel also attracted figures from the darker corners of American life. Sam Giancana, the Chicago mob boss who would later be linked to CIA plots to assassinate Fidel Castro, stayed at the Beverly Hills Hotel during his trips to the West Coast. He conducted business from the bungalows, meeting with studio executives who depended on his cooperation to keep their Las Vegas casino investments running smoothly. The overlap between Hollywood and organized crime was never openly acknowledged, but it was never fully hidden either. In March of 1964, something happened in Bungalow 8 that would haunt the hotel for decades. The precise details remain disputed, but the broad outline is clear. A woman was found dead. The death was ruled accidental. The police investigation was brief. No charges were filed. Yet rumors refused to die. Rumors that powerful people had been present when she died, that evidence had been destroyed, that the hotel's legendary discretion had crossed the line into conspiracy. The hotel never publicly acknowledged the incident. The bungalow was cleaned, redecorated, and rented to new guests as if nothing had happened. Staff members who worked that night either resigned or learned never to speak about what they had seen. The woman's name appeared briefly in a handful of gossip columns, then faded into obscurity. But among longtime residents and industry insiders, the story became part of the hotel's oral history. Something dark had happened inside the Pink Palace, and the walls had absorbed the secret. The incident marked a turning point. By the mid-1960s, the Beverly Hills Hotel began to lose its hold on Hollywood's imagination. The studio system was collapsing. A new generation of filmmakers was emerging. Directors who had no interest in old power structures and no patience for the rituals of the Polo Lounge. Young actors gravitated toward the countercultural enclaves of Laurel Canyon rather than the manicured luxury of Beverly Hills. The hotel that had defined Hollywood glamour for half a century suddenly felt outdated. Attendance at the Polo Lounge declined. Bungalows sat empty for weeks at a time. The once pristine grounds showed signs of deferred maintenance. The property remained profitable, but its cultural dominance was slipping away. In 1954, the hotel had been sold to Ben Silverstein for $5.5 million, roughly $62 million in today's dollars. Silverstein had built his fortune in real estate and oil. He understood the value of the property, but he also sensed that its golden era might be ending. When he died in 1976, his estate faced a difficult choice: sell while the hotel still commanded prestige, or hold on and hope for a revival. The family chose to sell. In 1979, they accepted an offer from Marvin Davis, an oil magnate from Denver, who paid $135 million for property, approximately $565 million in today's currency. Davis promised to restore the hotel to its former glory. He pledged $100 million for renovations. The Beverly Hills Hotel, he declared, would once again become the center of Hollywood. Davis kept his word. He spent lavishly on restoration. The bungalows were stripped down and rebuilt with modern amenities, while preserving their historic charm. The Polo Lounge was redecorated to resemble an English gentleman's club. The gardens were replanted with even more exotic species. Fresh coats of the hotel's signature pink paint covered every surface. By the time the renovations were completed in 1982, the hotel looked as magnificent as it had during its 1950s heyday. But Davis also made a decision that would nearly undo everything he had rebuilt. In 1987, he sold the Beverly Hills Hotel for $200 million to a buyer whose identity sparked immediate controversy. The new owner was Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah of Brunei, one of the wealthiest men on earth. His small Southeast Asian nation on the island of Borneo sat atop vast oil and natural gas reserves that made the royal family unimaginably rich. The Sultan's personal fortune was estimated at $20 billion. He collected Rolls Royces the way others collected stamps. He owned palaces across Asia and Europe. Now, he owned the Beverly Hills Hotel. At first, the sale appeared to be a blessing. The Sultan promised to maintain the hotel's standards. He pledged to preserve its character. He assured Hollywood that nothing would change. For several years, those promises held. The hotel continued to operate as it always had. The Polo Lounge remained crowded with industry power brokers. The bungalows stayed fully booked. The iconic pink facade continued to dominate Sunset Boulevard. Then, in 2014, everything changed. The Sultan's government enacted a series of laws that transformed the Beverly Hills Hotel from Hollywood's throne room into its most controversial property. Brunei adopted a strict interpretation of Sharia law that included punishments widely condemned by human rights organizations. The new penal code called for death by stoning for adultery and homosexuality. It mandated flogging for alcohol consumption and for pregnancy outside of marriage. The laws applied to both citizens and visitors, triggering international outrage. The connection to the Beverly Hills Hotel was immediate and unavoidable. The Sultan owned the property through his investment firm, the Brunei Investment Agency. Revenue from the hotel flowed directly into the royal treasury of a government that had just criminalized homosexuality with the death penalty. Critics argue that staying at the Beverly Hills Hotel meant financially supporting a regime that executed gay people. Hollywood faced an impossible reckoning. An industry that had long championed LGBTQ rights now found that the building, which had protected its secrets for over a century, represented values fundamentally opposed to everything modern Hollywood claimed to stand for. The response was swift and unforgiving. Jay Leno, comedian and former host of The Tonight Show, was the first major figure to speak out. He called for a boycott of all Brunei-owned properties, including not only the Beverly Hills Hotel, but also the Hotel Bel Air and multiple luxury hotels in London and Paris. Other celebrities quickly followed. Ellen DeGeneres, Richard Branson, and Stephen Fry all announced they would no longer patronize the hotel. The Human Rights Campaign, the largest LGBTQ advocacy organization in the United States, officially endorsed the boycott. The consequences were devastating. Major talent agencies canceled their regular meetings at the Polo Lounge. The Motion Picture and Television Fund moved its annual fundraiser elsewhere. The Feminist Majority Foundation relocated its awards ceremony. Conference organizers who had booked the hotel's ballrooms for years sought alternative venues. Within months, the hotel that had once anchored Hollywood's social calendar felt eerily empty. The staff suffered the most. Many employees had worked at the Beverly Hills Hotel for decades. Some had spent their entire adult lives within its pink walls. They had nothing to do with the Sultan's policies in Brunei, yet they were the ones who paid the price. As the boycott emptied dining rooms and erased reservations, tips vanished. Housekeepers who once serviced fully booked floors now cleaned empty rooms. Bartenders who had poured drinks for Hollywood's elite found themselves serving the occasional tourist. People who either didn't know about the boycott or simply didn't care. Hotel management tried to limit the damage. They released statements emphasizing that the property's employees were Americans who shared Hollywood's values. They pointed out that the hotel employed a diverse workforce that included many LGBTQ staff members. They argued that boycotting the hotel only hurt innocent workers, while doing nothing to change policies in Brunei. None of it mattered. The financial impact was devastating. Industry analysts estimated that the hotel lost tens of millions of dollars in revenue during the first year alone. Occupancy rates collapsed, falling from over 80% to below 40%. The bungalows, once booked months in advance, sat empty for weeks at a time. The Polo Lounge, Hollywood's power center for more than 70 years, served lunch to a handful of scattered tourists. Some defended the hotel. They argued that boycotts rarely achieve their stated goals and almost always harm the wrong people. They pointed out that many protesters had no issue doing business with other countries that violated human rights. They noted that the Sultan would not suffer financially from the boycott. His oil revenues dwarfed anything the hotel could generate. The only people truly hurt were the workers. Supporters of the boycott pushed back just as forcefully. They insisted that principles mattered more than convenience. They argued that Hollywood had spent decades hiding its compromises behind closed doors, and at the time had come to take a public stand. The Beverly Hills Hotel, they said, was the perfect target precisely because it had meant so much to the industry for so long. Abandoning it sent a message that some values could not be purchased at any price. The boycott also forced Hollywood to confront its own complicated relationship with the hotel. For decades, the property had protected powerful men who abused their positions. It had concealed affairs that destroyed families. It had provided cover for drug use, illegal gambling, and financial crimes. The industry had celebrated this discretion when it served their interests. Now, when discretion shielded a foreign government's oppression, silence was suddenly unacceptable. The hypocrisy was hard to ignore. Critics pointed out that many celebrities who loudly boycotted the hotel had previously overlooked human rights abuses by other business partners. Hollywood had long maintained profitable relationships with governments that imprisoned dissidents, censored artists, and denied basic freedoms. The Beverly Hills Hotel had simply become a convenient and visible target. The Sultan showed no interest in selling. He had paid $200 million for the property in 1987. By 2014, it was worth at least $500 million, possibly more. Even during the boycott, the hotel continued to generate revenue. The Sultan could afford to wait. As months turned into years, the hotel's emptiness became its own monument. The Pink Palace still loomed over Sunset Boulevard. The grounds remained meticulously maintained, but the cultural power of the hotel had wielded for a century was gone. The boycott reached its peak in 2015 and 2016. Protesters gathered outside the hotel's entrance on Sunset Boulevard. Activists handed flyers to passing tourists explaining why they should stay elsewhere. Social media campaigns urged travelers to avoid the property entirely. The Pink Palace had become Hollywood's most visible moral battleground. Inside, staff worked to preserve a sense of normalcy. Rooms were cleaned whether anyone stayed in them or not. The Polo Lounge served breakfast to whoever walked through the doors. The gardens received the same careful attention they always had. Still, the feeling of abandonment was impossible to escape. A hotel built for crowds felt haunted when empty. Some longtime guests continued to visit despite the boycott. Most were older industry veterans who remember when the hotel had been the center of their professional lives. They resented being told where they could and could not spend their money. They argued that loyalty to the staff mattered more than symbolic gestures. Even so, many of these offenders came less often as social pressure increased. The hotel tried to survive however it could. Management offered steep discounts to fill rooms. They marketed aggressively to international tourists unfamiliar with the boycott. They emphasized the property's history and architectural significance, hoping heritage tourism might replace the industry business they had lost. Nothing worked. By 2017, the boycott had become self-sustaining. Even people who disagreed with it avoided the hotel simply because everyone else did. The property had become culturally radioactive. Being seen entering the Beverly Hills Hotel invited criticism and uncomfortable questions. It was easier to go somewhere else. The situation raised troubling questions about the limits of moral responsibility. The staff had no control over the Sultan's policies. The Los Angeles management team could not influence decisions made in Brunei, yet they bore the consequences of choices made by people they would never meet. The boycott punished proximity rather than culpability. Some employees left out of frustration or financial necessity. Others stayed, hoping the boycott would eventually fade. Many had invested decades of their lives in the hotel. Their skills were not easily transferable. They waited, hoping Hollywood's attention span would be as short as its memory. The controversy also exposed the limits of celebrity activism. Many stars who championed the boycott continue to work with companies operating in countries with equally troubling human rights records. Film studios maintain distribution deals with authoritarian governments. Luxury brands produce goods in nations that suppress free speech. Tech companies built systems for surveillance states. Yet the Beverly Hills Hotel became the singular focus of outrage because it was visible, accessible, and symbolically powerful. Meanwhile, in Brunei, nothing changed. The Sultan showed no indication of reconsidering his policies. International criticism had no measurable impact. The boycott that devastated a hotel in Los Angeles failed to alter a single law in Brunei. The only tangible results were empty rooms and unemployed workers thousands of miles from the policies being protested. By 2019, the boycott had lasted 5 years. Occupancy stabilized at levels far below historical norms, but high enough to keep the hotel operating. The property still turned a profit, though nowhere near what it had earned before 2014. The Sultan, whose net worth was estimated at over $28 billion, could afford to wait indefinitely. Hollywood moved on. The industry's attention shifted to new controversies. Some celebrities who had led the boycott quietly resumed attending events at other Brunei-owned properties. The moral clarity that once felt absolute softened into pragmatic compromise. But the damage to the Beverly Hills Hotel remained. The hotel that had once defined Hollywood glamour became a cautionary tale about the cost of association. For more than a century, the Pink Palace had thrived by offering discretion, luxury, and access to power. The boycott revealed that these qualities could no longer shield an institution when political winds shifted. The same industry that once valued the hotel's willingness to look the other way now condemned it for that very trait. The story of the Beverly Hills Hotel had always been about more than architecture or amenities. It was about power and access, about who decided what mattered and what could be ignored. The boycott forced a reckoning with that history. The hotel had survived because it served powerful people. When those people decided it no longer served their interests, survival became uncertain. As the boycott entered its 6th year in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic arrived. Hotels across the world closed or operated at minimal capacity. Travel stopped. Events were canceled. The Beverly Hills Hotel, already weakened by years of controversy, faced an entirely new existential threat. The Pink Palace, which had survived depressions, wars, and cultural revolutions, now confronted a global crisis with its reputation damaged and its finances fragile. For the first time in its history, the Beverly Hills Hotel closed its doors. On March 17, 2020, California Governor Gavin Newsom issued a statewide shelter-in-place order. Within days, the hotel suspended operations. The Pink Palace, opened through 2 world wars and the Great Depression, went dark. The closure lasted 4 months. During that period, the property sat empty except for essential maintenance staff. The gardens were still watered. The buildings were still cleaned. But no guests wandered the grounds. No deals were struck in the Polo Lounge. The bungalows stood vacant. For the first time since 1912, silence settled across all 12 acres. When the hotel reopened in July 2020, it returned to a completely transformed world. International travel had collapsed. Business conferences had moved online. The entertainment industry had largely shut down production. The few people who still needed hotel rooms could choose from dozens of properties desperate for business. The Beverly Hills Hotel, already weakened by 6 years of boycott, now competed in a market where every hotel was fighting to survive. The pandemic had an unexpected effect on the boycott. With Hollywood focused on survival rather than activism, the protests faded. Demonstrations outside the hotel stopped. Social media campaigns moved on to new issues. The moral outrage that had fueled the boycott for years simply evaporated as people faced more immediate crises. The hotel benefited not from forgiveness, but from irrelevance. As travel slowly resumed in 2021 and 2022, the Beverly Hills Hotel found itself granted an unusual reprieve. A new generation of visitors had little memory of the boycott's intensity. Younger travelers primarily knew the property through Instagram, with the pink walls and tropical gardens photographed beautifully. Influencers began posting from the hotel again. Their millions of followers saw only the aesthetics, not the politics. Management recognized the opportunity immediately. They invested heavily in social media marketing, emphasizing the hotel's visual appeal rather than its controversial ownership. They partnered with luxury brands for promotional events. They offered package deals that bundled spa treatments and dining experiences. The Beverly Hills Hotel was deliberately repositioned as an Instagram destination instead of a Hollywood institution. The strategy worked better than anyone expected. By 2023, occupancy had recovered to levels not seen since before the boycott began. The bungalows were once again booked months in advance. The Polo Lounge served meals to capacity crowds. The hotel had not reclaimed its role as Hollywood's throne room, but it found a new kind of relevance for a new era. The recovery revealed something deeply uncomfortable about modern activism. The boycott that had seemed morally urgent in 2014 and existentially necessary had ended not because the Sultan changed his policies, but because people simply stopped paying attention. Brunei's laws remained unchanged. The hotel's ownership remained unchanged. What changed was public focus. Some of the original boycott supporters were disturbed by this outcome. They argued that returning to the hotel represented a moral failure, a surrender of principle in favor of convenience. They pointed out that the Sultan's government still enforced the same oppressive laws that had sparked the boycott in the first place. Nothing had been resolved. The issue had simply been forgotten. Others saw the collapse as inevitable. They had always believed celebrity activism was performative rather than principled, designed to generate favorable headlines rather than real change. The pandemic, they argued, proved the point. When maintaining the boycott became inconvenient, it disappeared. Moral stands lasted only as long as they aligned with personal self-interest. For the hotel staff, the dominant emotion was relief. They had never asked to become symbols in someone else's political battle. They wanted to work, earn a living, and support their families. The return of guests meant the return of income. Whatever moral complexities surrounded the hotel's ownership, rent still needed to be paid. The recovery also underscored the limitations of boycotts as tools for social change. The Beverly Hills Hotel had been targeted because it was visible, prestigious, and vulnerable to public pressure. The campaign succeeded in damaging its business, but failed to achieve its stated goal of forcing the Sultan to change Brunei's laws. Insulated by billions in oil wealth, the Sultan simply waited it out. In the end, American workers suffered far more than a Southeast Asian monarch ever did. By 2024, the hotel had largely shed its pariah status. A new generation of celebrities began hosting events there again. Studios booked ballrooms for premieres and after-parties. Industry executives returned to the Polo Lounge for breakfast meetings. The Pink Palace was welcomed back into Hollywood's orbit, not because anyone forgot what happened, but because forgetting proved easier than remembering. The hotel's resurrection raised difficult questions about institutional memory and collective responsibility. The building had not changed. The ownership had not changed. Brunei's laws had not changed. What changed was whether anyone felt obligated to care. The collapse of the boycott suggested that moral outrage, no matter how loudly expressed, has a limited shelf life in a culture driven by distraction and short attention spans. The hotel's path back from controversy required more than simply waiting for amnesia to set in. Management understood they needed to actively reshape the property's image while avoiding its political baggage. Their strategy combined deliberate silence with visual reinvention. Rather than defending the Sultan's ownership or apologizing for the boycott, the hotel stopped discussing politics altogether. Press inquiries about Brunei went unanswered. Requests for official statements were politely declined. The property presented itself as an architectural landmark and luxury destination. Nothing more. That approach worked because it allowed guests to return without having to justify their choice. At the same time, The hotel invested millions in renovations designed to refresh its image without erasing its past. The bungalows received full interior overhauls. Modern technology was installed throughout the property. The Polo Lounge was redesigned to feel both classic and contemporary. The message was subtle but clear. This was not the same hotel that had been boycotted. Legally and structurally, nothing fundamental had changed. Culturally, everything had. The Beverly Hills Hotel had always survived by reading the zeitgeist and adapting. In the 1940s, that meant creating the Polo Lounge for industry power brokers. In the 1950s, it meant offering secluded bungalows to stars desperate for privacy. In the 2020s, it meant becoming an Instagram destination for a generation that valued aesthetics over history. The hotel's social media presence exploded. Professional photographers were hired to capture its most flattering angles. Influencers were invited to stay in exchange for posts. The iconic pink facade appeared in thousands of photos across platforms. For young travelers planning trips to Los Angeles, the Beverly Hills Hotel became a must-visit location. Not because of its legacy, but because of how it looked on a phone screen. This shift, from institutional power center to visual spectacle, marked a fundamental change in what the hotel represented. For most of its existence, the Beverly Hills Hotel mattered because of who stayed there and what happened behind closed doors. Discretion was its currency. But in an era where privacy was nearly impossible and social media turned private moments into public performance, discretion no longer carried the same value. The hotel adapted by embracing visibility instead of secrecy. Grounds once shielded from photographers now welcomed them. Pink walls that had absorbed a century of confidential meetings became backdrops for public display. The property that had built its reputation on knowing when to look away now thrived by being looked at. Some longtime industry figures mourn the change. They remember when the Beverly Hills Hotel had been a sanctuary, a place where deals could be made and affairs managed without fear of exposure. The new openness felt like a betrayal of everything the hotel once stood for. But those complaints no longer carried much weight. The industry itself had changed. The studio system that made the Polo Lounge essential no longer existed. Power had fragmented. The need for discreet gathering spaces had faded. The hotel's traditional role had become obsolete long before the boycott ever began. The recovery was also helped by cultural amnesia. By 2024, many celebrities who once led the boycott had moved on or stopped mentioning it altogether. Some faced accusations of hypocrisy for continuing to work with other morally compromised entities. Others simply discovered that sustained activism required more energy than momentary outrage. The boycott faded because maintaining it demanded effort that people were unwilling to give. The hotel staff, who lived through the entire ordeal, developed their own understanding of what had happened. They watched their workplace become a political symbol overnight. They endured years of financial hardship for decisions they had no role in making. They witnessed the intensity of outrage and its eventual collapse. Many emerged deeply cynical about celebrity activism and moral posturing. They learned that principles were negotiable and that outrage, no matter how loud, always had an expiration date. The Beverly Hills Hotel survival also rested on one undeniable reality. It sat on some of the most valuable land in Los Angeles. The 12 acres at the corner of Sunset Boulevard and Rodeo Drive were worth hundreds of millions of dollars no matter what stood on them. The Sultan could afford to lose money on the hotel indefinitely because the land itself was a constantly appreciating asset. Even if the property never fully recovered its former status, it would still retain enormous value. By 2025, the hotel had completely resumed operations at pre-boycott levels. Room rates range from around $700 per night for standard rooms to more than $10,000 for the most exclusive bungalows. Prices consistent with other luxury properties in Los Angeles. The Polo Lounge once again required reservations days in advance. Industry events returned to the ballrooms. The Pink Palace had reclaimed its physical place in Hollywood's landscape. But the hotel that emerged from the boycott was fundamentally different from the one that entered it. The institutional power it had wielded for decades was gone. The cultural centrality it once enjoyed had shifted elsewhere. What remained was a beautiful building with a complicated history, serving a clientele that valued aesthetics and luxury more than the deeper meanings the property had once represented. The recovery exposed some harsh truths about institutional survival in the modern era. Loyalty meant nothing once it became inconvenient. Moral principles could be set aside when they conflicted with personal desires. Public memory lasted only until the next distraction arrived. The Beverly Hills Hotel survived not by changing anything essential about itself, but by outlasting the attention spans of its critics. Today, the Beverly Hills Hotel stands exactly where it has stood since 1912. The salmon-pink facade still dominates the corner of Sunset and Rodeo Drive. The 12 acres of tropical gardens still thrive in a climate that should not support them. The bungalows still offer privacy to guests who can afford their rates. From the outside, very little appears to have changed. But the hotel's relationship with Hollywood has been permanently altered. It is no longer where power resides. It is where power occasionally visits. The Polo Lounge still serves breakfast, but the deals that shape the entertainment industry now happen in conference rooms, inside streaming companies and at technology firms. The bungalows still host celebrities, but their affairs are far more likely to be exposed on social media than protected by hotel staff. The discretion that defined the property for a century has become impossible to sustain in an age of constant surveillance and instant communication. The hotel's survival raises deeper questions about what institutions are and whether their meaning can endure radical shifts in context. The Beverly Hills Hotel was built to serve a specific Hollywood, one dominated by a small number of studios and defined by careful control of public image. That Hollywood no longer exists. The industry has fractured into hundreds of production companies, streaming platforms, and independent creators. The centralized power that once made the Polo Lounge essential has dissipated, and yet the building endures. It survives partly because of its location, partly because of its architecture, and partly because some stories are too powerful to let disappear. The Beverly Hills Hotel has become a monument to its own past, a place people visit not because they need to, but because the name still carries weight. That weight is no longer power. It is nostalgia. Walk through the lobby today and you'll see tourists photographing the pink walls, influencers staging content in the gardens, and wealthy travelers from around the world seeking a piece of Hollywood mythology. You might also spot a few industry veterans having lunch in the Polo Lounge, but they are vastly outnumbered by visitors with no connection to the entertainment business and little interest in the hotel's complicated history. Most of the staff working there now were hired after the boycott ended. They know the outline of what happened, but they did not live through it. For them, the Beverly Hills Hotel is simply a workplace, one that happens to be famous and occasionally controversial. They change the linens, serve the meals, maintain the grounds, and go home at the end of their shifts. The mythology surrounding the hotel exists separately from their daily reality. The hotel story forces an uncomfortable reckoning with complicity and responsibility. For more than a century, the Beverly Hills Hotel protected powerful people who used that protection to conceal affairs, crimes, and corruption. The same industry that later condemned the hotel for its ownership had once celebrated it for precisely that discretion. The moral outrage that fueled the boycott was selective at best and hypocritical at worst. At the same time, the boycott revealed something real about shifting values. Hollywood in 2014 was not the same as Hollywood in 1954 or 1914. An industry that once prized privacy above all else had been pressured by social movements and public scrutiny to at least perform a commitment to civil rights. The Beverly Hills Hotel became a test of whether that commitment meant anything. The test showed that the commitment was strong enough to cause economic damage, but not strong enough to endure. The building itself bears witness to the entire transformation. Walls that once absorbed the sound of opera rehearsals now absorb the clicks of smartphone cameras. Bungalows that sheltered Hollywood legends now host Instagram influencers. The Polo Lounge that once brokered studio contracts now serves brunch to tourists. The hotel survived by becoming something different, while looking exactly the same. There's a lesson in that survival. Institutions persist not because they preserve their original purpose, but because they adapt to serve new ones. The Beverly Hills Hotel no longer defines Hollywood power, because Hollywood power no longer needs a single place to exist. It is scattered across countless locations and now lives mostly in contracts negotiated through email and Zoom. Still, the hotel offers something of value. It offers a connection to a mythic past, a chance to walk where legends walked, to sit where deals were made, to sleep in rooms once occupied by stars. Whether that is enough to sustain the institution for another century remains an open question. The challenges ahead have little to do with boycotts or politics. Los Angeles itself is changing. The city that once revolved around the entertainment industry now hosts technology companies, finance firms, and multinational corporations. The next generation of wealthy travelers may not care about Hollywood history at all. They may prefer hotels that reflect contemporary values rather than nostalgic ones. The Sultan still owns the property. His investment company has shown no interest in selling. The hotel remains profitable enough to justify holding it as a long-term asset. Even if the building's relevance fades, the land alone guarantees its value. The 12 acres at Sunset and Rodeo will always be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But buildings are more than real estate. They are stories made physical. The story of the Beverly Hills Hotel is one of ambition and accommodation, of power and its limits, of institutions serving the powerful until power moves elsewhere. It is a story of discretion maintained until discretion becomes complicity, of survival, achieved at the cost of meaning. The Pink Palace stands as a monument to American celebrity culture, with all its glamour and all its compromises. It has witnessed romance and betrayal, brilliance and scandal, triumph and tragedy. It has sheltered presidents and criminals, artists and frauds. It has survived depressions, wars, boycotts, and a global pandemic. It survives still, not as Hollywood's throne room, not as the center of American entertainment, but as a beautiful building with a complicated past, offering luxury to anyone willing to pay for it and overlook where the money flows. The walls no longer guard secrets. They simply stand, salmon-pink against the California sky, adding new chapters to a story that refuses to end. The Beverly Hills Hotel, where dreams were made and compromises were hidden, where power once gathered and eventually scattered, where Hollywood learned how to be Hollywood, and then learned how to become something else. Still standing, still pink,